The election of 2000 was historic in many ways. Al Gore was running as a Democrat against George W. Bush, a Republican. This was a very close election. And when it came down to it, George W. Bush won the electoral vote, but Al Gore won the popular vote. There were many disputed votes coming out of Florida. You see here, these men in these pictures are very closely examining these ballots. The issue was that there were some voting machine irregularities. The machines were not properly, completely punching out the holes next to the candidate's name that the person wanted to vote for. That's why these men and many others began to recount these votes in an attempt to see how this would sway this election. This winds up going all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is going to rule that the very first results that came out of Florida were final because there had been no set standard of how to judge votes. So when the Supreme Court rules in this way, it is going to give George W. Bush the election. It wasn't very long after he took office in 2001 that is going to completely change the way the United States views the rest of its history. On September 11, 2001, a terrorist group attacked the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. 4 planes total were hijacked and used as weapons and were flown into the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and the passengers on the 4th plane were going to overtake the plane and crash it into a field in order to keep it from being used as another weapon. Osama bin Laden, who was the leader of the terrorist group Al-Qaeda, is going to take credit for this attack. Because this particular terrorist group was operating in Afghanistan, basically with Afghanistan's permission, or at least they weren't being prohibited from operating within its borders, Afghanistan was warned that if they did not turn over these men or this terrorist group, that the United States would declare war on them. And we did. So the United States went to war in Afghanistan as a result of the attack on September 11th. There were many homeland security concerns. People were very afraid, especially since these attacks had come from within the United States itself. The federal government is going to pass a law called the Patriot Act. This allowed the federal government to wiretap your phone calls, to monitor your library rentals, your bookstore purchases, all without a warrant. This law is very controversial because the question was, if the government is allowed to wiretap your phone calls without a warrant, this is an infringement on your civil liberties. Where might it lead to next? And while many Americans said it didn't matter to them because they weren't terrorists, that you could wiretap their phones all they wanted to, the question was still a question of civil liberties. So groups like the ACLU, or the American Civil Liberties Union, definitely took a stance against this law. President Bush is going to attempt to try to boost our economy through tax cuts. The stock market had finally bounced back from its recession in the 90s, and interest rates have been at their lowest level that they had been in years. This is great for people who are borrowing money or trying to build a house or buy a house, but it's not the best if you have money in any type of interest-bearing account, if you had money in a savings account, for example. His education legislation is called No Child Left Behind. This was attempting to try to get all children on grade level by a particular date. It is going to also increase the amount of testing that students were going. He's going to push faith-based initiatives as opposed to the government intervening in various social programs. He's also going to get Medicare prescription medicines pushed through, as well as getting another Supreme Court justice appointed and to be the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who was going to be a conservative. The United States, however, at the very early turn of the century was not doing very well. We had many corporate scandals where the leaders of various large corporations were fraudulently using their employees' money to invest and make fraudulent transactions, leaving their employees in really a bad situation when their entire retirement was going to be gone or spent in other ways they had no idea, and they were left with nothing. The war on terrorism is going to continue. We create a new department in the cabinet called Homeland Security. The Patriot Act is also going to continue. The United States also gets involved in another war, this time in Iraq. While many Americans believe that Iraq had something to do with the September 11th terrorist attacks, it did not. We went to war in Iraq because we had gotten intel that Iraq, under the leadership of Saddam Hussein, had attained weapons of mass destruction, or nuclear weapons, or possibly chemical weapons. Once we went to war in Iraq, we never found any. However, while we were there, we were successful at overthrowing Saddam Hussein, who was not a good democratic leader. In fact, he was very cruel and evil, and even was known to have used chemical weapons on his own people. There were many debates over this war effort and the whole reason why we were even involved in the first place, since we never found any weapons of mass destruction. Our budget deficits continue to grow. And then we have a catastrophic hurricane hit New Orleans and the Gulf Coast. When this hurricane hits, it is going to cause major devastation, and the federal government did not respond in a timely manner, nor did they give those citizens exactly what they needed when the storm hit. The election of 2008 is also going to bring about many new things. George W. Bush had already completed 2 terms as president, so he was not going to run again. So the Republicans nominate John McCain, and he will later choose his running mate to be Sarah Palin. The Democrats had a major battle for the Democratic nomination. It was between Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. This battle went on for a very long time, eventually leading to Obama winning the Democratic nomination, and then goes on to win the presidential election. He becomes the very first minority to become president of the United States. This election sets a brand new standard of the amount of money that candidates were spending on political campaigns. We also saw a huge rise in the use of internet campaigning. Candidates were now using the internet to reach younger audiences in order to campaign. Once in office, Obama is going to appoint Hillary Clinton to become the Secretary of State. The United States economy, by the time Obama takes office, was in a total downward spiral. The stock market had completely melted down, which is going to eventually lead the United States government to have to bail out various industries like the banking industry, insurance industries, and the automobile industries. And we had very bad predictions about record budget deficits, meaning that we were just spending way more money than we were possibly bringing in. Green technologies on the horizon are going to be a place where there are lots of jobs coming available. We are going to continue to have to fight against terrorism. Terrorism is not completely singular to the United States. There are terrorist attacks that were occurring all over the world. We are trying to decrease our dependence on foreign oil as well, and look for alternative energy resources. The question about how much the government should be regulating our industry remains in the forefront of most political discussions.